Okay, good afternoon. Welcome, everybody. My name is Can. I'm here with Linkso, and we've got Lisa and Kathleen Putnam again from the Master Gardeners. And today's talk will be about winter pruning. Without further ado, I'll turn it over to them. Welcome, both of you.
Thanks. I'll just do a super quick introduction of my sister, Kathleen. She is a horticulturist and an ISA Certified Arborist. And we prune together. We've been pruning together, I guess maybe about 15 years of pruning together. And pruning is so much more fun when you can do it with somebody else. So I've been out pruning my own fruit trees when we had a break in the weather. But I miss doing it with you, Kathleen. So
yeah, when we prune together, we always have a conversation and make decisions and talk about things. So there's many ways to prune.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is just, don't expect to be a great pruner right away. Pruning is both an art and a science. It takes practice, experience, and most important, learning from your mistakes to become a good pruner.
Yeah, I'll just add, it's not just a conversation with the other person you're pruning with, it's a conversation with the tree.
Yeah. So this is just some basic terminology. So we, you understand what we're talking about. Good branch, crotch. This is a good attachment. It's strong. This one is very narrow. It's not so strong. This is a central leader, which we'll get into more. You can see the healing of a cut. So if anyone has any questions about this, we can go over that later. Winter pruning is best for the tree structure. It tends to result in strong growth in the spring. I am not winter pruning most of my fruit trees. I'm taking a little bit off of some of them, but they're the size I want them to be. So I don't want a lot of growth. So I do a lot of summer pruning because I have a fairly small yard, and that's how I keep my trees the size I want them.
So Kathleen, can I ask you, when you're doing winter pruning right now, then are you doing a lot of little cuts?
Yeah, I'm doing like a few crossing branches, a few branches growing into the middle, and that's about it.
Okay.
But you know, these are 5-year-old trees, so their structure is set. They're good to go now.
Okay.
Now I just want to keep them small.
Yeah.
Okay, so these are the 4 Ds of pruning: dead, diseased, damaged, and dysfunctional. So dead, I mean, clearly you're going to cut out any dead in your tree. You're still going to make a good cut, but you are going to cut out the dead of the dead wood. Diseased. In most trees, you want to take the disease out as soon as you see it because it will spread if you don't. This one here is fire blight, and you can see the dark stem. You would want to take that out right away. This one, it's probably Composter, and you're going to want to take it out, but it's not as urgent. Damaged, obviously, you're going to take, this is probably a stress crack. So you're definitely going to want to take this limb off, and this, you'd have to cut down to here. And dysfunctional is more of a personal aesthetic. It's a branch that's kind of going in a funky direction or out of place, or a lot of times when you're pruning, a branch just annoys you or bugs you. Well, cut it out. All right, branch growth. This is, I don't know if you guys have ever heard of Kevin Raftery. He's a teacher at Foothill and teaches pruning, and he's an amazing arborist. And I took his class 4 times. And the most important part of what he teaches is how to make a proper cut. And a proper cut is going to be right outside. This is the branch ridge collar. And inside here is meristem tissue, which is tissue that can grow. So if you cut right outside of that, then this tissue will grow over and heal that wound. And again, here, you're going to cut it right outside the branch ridge collar so that that tissue can come out and heal the wound. And this is what the inside of it looks like. So the yes here, this line is outside the branch ridge collar. And this right here is the actual meristem tissue. This is the tissue that will grow and heal that wound. This is a big problem, and as trees get bigger, this is called included bark. All the way down here, you can see it's not a single trunk, but it's two trunks that grew together, and that this is the inside of them, and there's not connecting tissue. And in a storm like we're having right now, this tree is going to fail, and it's going to fall one way or the other, and it's probably going to damage something important. So again, the pruning cut is just outside the branch ridge collar, right here, nice round, small wound, angled cut, and that's going to allow that wound to heal. I know I'm harping on this, but this is really, it took me 4 times of taking a class to get this concept. So this is a Japanese maple in my backyard, and it had this big stub. And so I climbed up there and I cut it out. And if you look right in here, this is disease. So this stub cut, the branch ridge collar's right here. This stub was so far out that the tree couldn't heal it. It couldn't compartmentalize the wound, and disease got into the tree. I should go out there and take a new picture, but it's raining.
Kathleen, on that last, well, you'll probably talk about it here, but you said angled cut, the slide before this one.
Yeah.
And actually, you don't do angled cuts, you do flat cuts.
Well, that's on a smaller branch. You know, where that's like on a branch the size of your thumb or something. But on a large branch like this, if you just did, well, yeah, you're kind of right.
Well, the only thing I want to emphasize is you're making the smallest cut possible. So a lot of people come and do cuts that are at an angle like this instead of like this, but what you're trying to do is have the smallest wound possible.
Yeah.
So don't do an angled cut, do a flat cut.
Yeah, although like if you would have done a flat cut right here, it would have been this.
Right, I understand. Yeah, well, I think we can get into it more later. You have to follow the branch ridge collar, but what you don't want to do is come and make like a 45-degree cut in there.
Yeah, no, the cut should be round. The wound should be round.
Yeah.
And I actually have a great flush cut to show. So again, this is actually important. This is making large cuts, and you need to make an undercut if it's a really large branch, because there's so much weight out here that if you just went in here and made the cut, you're going to have a tear out. Or you can just, what I usually do is I just cut off further out, cut off the entire branch, and then I make the cut I want. And all that weight then is not there. And here's an example of a tear out.
Yeah.
And there's nothing you can do now. This goes into the main stem of the central leader of the tree. And this is just a huge wound that's going to get diseased and eventually, I mean, it's just bad. That's all we need to say. It's just bad. And these are proper cuts. And this is what a proper cut, this is the meristem tissue coming over and healing the cut, which Lisa and I like to call sphincters
As they are.
because they look like sphincters. And you want really nice sphincters on your tree. There's a really good sphincter.
Going for the good sphincter.
That's okay, so bad cuts. These are stub cuts. They're out too far from the tree, from the meristem tissue. They cannot be healed down here as well. And this, in the old days, before they started doing research on trees, it was very common. They did a flush cut. And I mean, look at how huge this wound is. And they've cut off the branch ridge collar. So they've cut off any tissue that could possibly help heal this wound. So don't do flush cuts and don't do stub cuts, and you'll be fine. And this is the tree right across from my house. And it's horrible. And I have to look at it every day. And it hurts. It actually, my spouse knows this. It hurts me to have to see a tree poorly pruned. She says I'm an elitist because I think I'm the only one who can prune correctly. But it's just, there's so many people do bad pruning.
Yeah.
And so I gave her examples of good pruning. And so I'm not an elitist. But one thing, and I will say this, and this just came to mind when she called me an elitist, is my cousin had a pine tree in her backyard that she pruned, and she was very proud of herself. And she said, it didn't matter if she did it right or wrong because it'll grow back. Well, trees are not like your hair. They don't just grow back. If you make a bad cut on a tree, it's just going to sit there like that the rest of your life, staring at you, saying you made a bad cut.
Well, and also when you make bad cuts, you're inviting in disease, you're not getting good growth, you're not getting good attachments, you're not, that tree then it's going to drop a branch. I mean, it's actually kind of dangerous to make bad cuts.
Yeah, and in the 5 years that I've been here, this tree has declined significantly.
Yeah.
And they keep making bad cuts. Now they've topped it. It's horrible.
Yeah. Well, that's
Yeah.
tough.
But yeah, no. The reason you don't want stub cuts is the tree can't heal the wound. And so that wound is open to insects and disease forever.
Yeah.
Which is why on my little maple, there was that dark spot of disease that had come into my tree.
Yeah.
So this is, I think this is a great slide for, there's two types of cuts. There's heading cuts and thinning cuts. And heading cuts is you just indiscriminately cut. And this shows that. And this is how the tree is going to react. This is called witch's broom. It's just, all of the latent buds that were right in here were then released by the hormones that the tree puts out to keep them latent. And you get this poorly attached, just tons of growth. Whereas down here, a thinning cut, you take off one branch and you still have a really nice, well-structured branch. Okay, so heading cuts, removal of part of branch. So you just, you're just cutting it off. Used to promote branch development. And the very first time I plant a fruit tree, I do make a heading cut because I want this kind of reaction. I want those latent buds to break. And then I will, the next year I will deal with which one I want, which one I don't want, which one I'll keep or not. But it'll definitely reduce the sunlight penetration. And if you have a hedge, you're doing just a ton of heading cuts. That's what keeps your hedge lush and green, is a ton of heading cuts. Because if you look at this slide where they made these cuts, you get all this. Well, on a hedge, that's what you want, but on a fruit tree, it's not what you want. And I love
That's
this.
a great sign.
This is how the growers are now pruning their fruit trees. They just have these giant tractors with these swirling knives or these swirling blades that come through, and they just indiscriminately cut to a certain height and a certain width. And this is what they get.
It's super ugly.
It's super, super ugly. These are never going to heal. The growers have made a decision. It's cheaper to do this and replace those trees every 20 years than prune them properly and extend their life. So it's for them, it's an economic decision. But for most of us, we don't want this in our backyard. That's just awful.
Yeah. Yeah. And they don't care about aesthetics, but in your backyard, you want your fruit trees to look pretty.
Yeah. So I really hate heading cuts. And this is, again, heading cuts are just the crazy growth you get from a heading cut. And I just threw this in there because sometimes people get confused. This is a pollarded tree. You'll see them all over San Francisco, Golden Gate Park, and the Civic Center. And, this is done intentionally. They cut to the same. They're still making a good cut. They're just making it on this knob. It's also at Filoli. So not to be mistaken with heading cuts. It's a pollarded tree. Okay, so pruning cuts. Every cut you make wounds the tree. You want to make the smallest cut possible because it's easier for the tree to heal that cut. Large cuts increase the potential for decay, disease, and insect damage. So cut just outside the branch collar. Do not flush cut or stub cut. Now this is why I'm not pruning my trees this winter, because a tree branch left unpruned in the winter grows very little, maybe in a couple inches. Light pruning, 25%, you'll get about less than a foot of growth on that tree. If you make a bigger cut, further in, harder cut, you'll get about a foot, maybe a little bit more. And if you make a really heavy cut, you will get a very strong response. And the reason you want to know this is, and it's a little counterintuitive, and it's especially true on like a 4-in-1 tree, the one that is doing the least well, that's growing the least, you're going to want to prune that one the most. And what? Go ahead, Lisa.
Well, I have a question on this, because so much of my fruit trees now are 4 years old, where I'm at now, and then I have other fruit trees that are a lot older. But right now I feel like I'm doing a lot of this type of cutting. I'm not cutting to branch ridge colors anymore because I have the branches, I have the scaffolding branches I want. But I feel like when this is long like that it's not strong enough to hold the piece of fruit. And so I'm doing a fairly, I call it tipping, but I mean, I'm cutting to the outward facing bud just to make that branch stronger, thinking that the diameter is going to be getting bigger and it can hold that piece of fruit than this long branch, and you get a piece of fruit on the outside of it and that branch can't hold it.
But are you cutting more than 50% of the branch?
Sometimes, I mean, the branch looks exactly like this, it's wispy, right? I mean, when you put any weight on it, I think, especially like a peach tree, where you can get a piece of fruit and that piece of fruit can be somewhere, it could be a 10 ounce, easily a 10 ounce piece of fruit. And so I'm cutting it back thinking, well, if it's going to put a piece of fruit, because that growth isn't gonna, it's not going to fruit on the new growth. It's going to fruit on the old growth.
Yeah, that's true.
So it seems to me that, I know, I'm sorry, I'm sidelining this, but that you do, on some of them, you do want to cut 50% back because you want that to be strong enough to hold that piece of fruit. And the growth is going to come the next year and the fruit's going to come the following year.
Yeah, no, that's
Okay.
absolutely true.
Okay.
That, I mean, if you left this uncut, there's still no fruit on it.
Mm-hmm.
It would be next year you'd get fruit on this. So it'd be okay, but I would probably cut this branch like here, maybe even here.
Mm-hmm.
Just you wouldn't get as much growth, but yeah, you'd want to cut this branch somewhere.
Yeah. Okay.
And if you guys notice that, and I should go back. Well, not this one, but so there's this bud here and the arrow goes this way. Because when you cut to this bud, it's like a little arrow showing you which way it's going to grow. And same here, there's this little bud and it's going to grow that way. And there's this little bud and it's going to grow that way.
Yeah.
So that's important to know, because if you were to cut here, it would grow this way.
Yeah.
And you probably don't want it growing that way.
It depends.
Yeah. Because you don't see the whole tree. So it's hard to know.
Yeah.
So thinning cuts is you just take off the entire branch or shoot. So like this, you can see the pictures. It's hard in two dimension to imagine the 3-dimensional pruning, but it opens the tree up or the bush up and it allows sunlight penetration. And tools to live by. Hold on. I actually have, these are ARS, and I like them because you just squeeze them open, which is really nice, especially when you're up in the tree or on a ladder. You don't have to use your other hand to open them up, but they're bypassed. They're just like a pair of scissors. Here's the anvil, and here's the blade, and they bypass and they make a nice cut. And then saws. Lisa loves her
I love my pocket boy.
Pocket Boy. These are all Pocket Boys, and this is probably Zubat, but these are the only tools you need pruning a live tree or pruning a live anything. Never use on a living tree anvil pruners, which just have a flat surface and a blade and it crushes the branch. And loppers, the blade is too big to make a good cut, so you never want to use that on on a living tree. You could use it on the branches on the ground to fit into your green bin. And never use a pruning sealer. Nature knows how to take care of itself. If you put a pruning sealer on there, you're just sealing in moisture and the tree can't heal as well. Okay, what to consider before making a cut? Why am I cutting here? And Lisa and I, this runs through our heads every time we prune. What am I cutting to? Can I make a good cut? How will the tree react to this cut? And I know the quality of these 3 slides is not great, but this is a good cut. This angle here is far too big. If you look at the size of this wound and the size of this wound, this is like twice as big. And then this is just too far out from the node. This is a stub. On a little branch, you can still do stub cuts on a little branch.
Yeah. And I just want to say, Kathleen, I think you probably make this more explicit, but what am I cutting to the second bullet point up there? So Kathleen spent a lot of time talking about branch ridge collars, and you're either cutting to a branch ridge collar or you're cutting to an outward facing bud, branch, node, but you're always cutting 100% of the time. You are cutting to something. You're never just doing that indiscriminate cut that you saw those big machines that the orchardists use. Those are just a whole bunch of indiscriminate cuts, and then you're just going to get tons and tons of witch's broom. So you're always cutting to something that can handle the growth.
Yes.
Does that make sense? Okay.
And reasons for trading fruit trees: reduce tree height, improve sunlight penetration, rejuvenate your fruiting spurs, and reduce the amount of fruit thinning. When Lisa and I prune, especially peaches, a lot of the time we cut off what we know is fruiting wood because we know the branch can't hold it. So it's very hard to thin fruit, but it's pretty easy to prune it before it's fruited.
Yeah.
And I have one pear tree that is not an open center, but all my other trees are open center, which just means that the middle is open. So the center of the tree is open. And think of it as a martini cup. It's the same thing that you do with roses, just bigger. But then the sun can come in, and I have another slide, this way and this way and this way. And you get much better sun penetration. And the reason you care about sun penetration is that's how your fruit forms and ripens. So you can see how much more sunlight in open center. You get the sunlight in the middle, in the side, and in the other side. And in the central leader, you get the sunlight just in the sides, a little bit on the top. So pruning an open center tree, hopefully you do it with somebody else, but you walk around the entire tree and you really look at it. And I can't tell you the number of people, not Lisa, that I've pruned with that just start pruning. They don't walk around the tree and they don't think what they want the tree to look like when they're finished. So you walk around the tree and you really look at it, and then you start working and you remove any inward facing branches and water sprouts from the center of the tree. And then I tend to divide the tree into quarters, and I just start working on each quarter until I'm done. And I thin out crossing or duplicate branches, cut back the smallest branches, and any branches that can't carry the fruit load.
Yeah. And I'm just going to reiterate what Kathleen said about walking around the entire tree at first. You're going to save yourself time in the long run if you do that, because you're going to see if there are some major branches that you need to take to the branch ridge collar. So instead of, Kathleen always calls it death by 1,000 cuts. I mean, you can work and work and work on a branch, and you've done maybe 20 cuts on that branch.
Yeah.
And then you're like, this branch shouldn't be here. This branch is crossing with another branch or in competition with another branch. And then you take out the branch. Well, you just spent whatever, you just spent 10 minutes on a branch that you're going to take out anyway. So I think it's good to have kind of a strategy and then start, so you don't waste so much time.
Yeah, or if you leave that branch and you put 20 cuts on it, you've just wounded that branch 20 times.
Yeah.
That probably there was one big cut you could have made, and it would have saved all those 20 cuts.
Right, right.
So central leader, pears really want to be central leaders. I have a pear in my backyard that I kind of tried to make an open center, and he just wasn't having it. So I've gone with the central leader, but it's a modified central leader. So you have a group of branches down at the bottom that are nicely spaced, meaning like that they form like an X off the central leader, that they go in all 4 directions. And then you have what's called a skip. And that's this space here. And that is most important, so you can still get sunlight penetration. If you didn't have that skip in here, you wouldn't get any sunlight. So you have that skip, and then you have another little group of branches, and then you're probably going to want to keep it at that height, because you don't want your tree, at least I don't want my tree where I have to pull a ladder out to work on it. And then there's a espalier, which is my favorite.
Yeah, they're beautiful.
Well, once an espalier is established, it's the easiest thing in the world to prune, because you don't want the levels to touch. So you just go through, and I mean, you don't do heading cuts, but you cut to a bud on the bottom level, and then you go up another level and you cut those guys out, and then you go up another level and you cut those guys out, and you don't really have to think that much, which is kind of fun. And yeah, that's it. But you do need to summer prune. They'll be great if you only winter prune in espalier. It's going to be impossible to control its size and its growth. So the most important thing, I didn't used to, but when I prune people's fruit trees, they often tell me that they had somebody else prune and then they didn't have any fruit for a year or two. And the reason is, most pruning is done by people who don't know where their fruit is on the wood. We call it fruiting wood. So like on palm fruit, which is apples, pears, and quince, they get these little spurs with this little wrinkly here. And then here's where you're going to get your flowers and your fruit. And same with a pear. Pear's a little stretched out more, but these are both pears. Quince, interestingly, flowers and fruits on the very end.
Oh,
And all these guys get fire blight. This one the worst. But if you didn't know it, you might want to cut off all these funny little spurs, but you don't want to, because that's your fruit. And then stone fruit, you get these little clusters of buds on a cherry, same with the apricot, and same with the plum. The peach is the least. The peach is kind of in a class of its own in how it fruits. But once you learn that it's a 3-bud system, so there's 2 flowers and a leaf or a branch in the middle, is a peach. So I think peaches are the hardest to learn, to recognize. So I did another slide just on peaches so that you guys understand that. So here's your three. So there's the leaf, and there's the flower and the flower. And they stick out more. You can see this guy's sticking out more than this one that isn't sticking out. It's tighter to the branch. and then again, the 3.
So Kathleen, the 3, you have 2 flowers on either side, so they each can potentially become a peach.
Yeah,
And the middle's going to become a leaf or a branch. Now, when you see it and it's just 1 bud or 2 buds and not 3,
right.
is that going to be a flower? Is that going to be a peach, or is that going to be a leaf or a branch?
No, like this guy,
Yeah.
you'll have 2 leaves,
Oh,
or
okay.
it's vegetative.
It's vegetative. So the only time you're going to get fruit on the peach is you have to have the 3 buds.
Correct.
Okay.
And on this wimpy little branch,
Mm-hmm.
even though it's a side view, I think this is a 3.
Oh, okay.
I would make a cut here.
Yeah.
Because this branch will not be able to hold a whole peach.
Yeah. And I know you already went through this, but that one cut you just showed from the one that's probably 3 on the side, you might notice that, Kathleen, you still do leave, I mean, I guess you'd call it a stub, but well, this is Orrin Martin, but I think you and I disagree a tiny bit on this, but that you want to, you're going to get a little dieback from that cut. So you want to make sure you're like a 1/4 inch above, or the top of the cut is the same as the top of the bud.
Yeah, so my new rule
Mm-hmm.
is when I'm cutting,
Mm-hmm.
when I can touch the top of the bud,
Yeah.
that's when I cut.
Okay. That makes sense.
Yeah. Okay. So apples and pears. Their spurs are good for about 10 years. It says 6 to 10 and 3 to 10, but I found 10 years is about it. You want to prune for structure and fruit spur development every year. Thin out older spurs, and you can tell an older spur because it's dead. It's black and it looks dead. And you want to improve light penetration and air circulation. It says prune new spurs at least 2/3 to an outward facing bud. And you really, really need to watch the weight on apples and pears. Just think any fruit that's heavy, you really need to watch the weight. You can prop up your branches when they start to, when the fruit starts to get heavy. But I don't know, personally, I just find it better to prune so you don't need to do that. Any thoughts, Lisa?
Yeah,
Oh,
no,
pears like to go up.
yeah, pears, well, and especially plums, but you'll get to that. But yeah, I think, when I think Kathleen's talking about the weight, like a cherry doesn't weigh anything, and some plums are really tiny, they don't weigh anything. You don't need to worry so much. But Kathleen and I, when we're pruning, we're just constantly pulling down on the branch and saying, can this hold a pound? Can this hold 2 pounds? Can this hold 3 pounds? I've had huge breakouts on peach trees, and it's hard. It's hard to see, it's so bad for the tree. And, obviously then also you've just lost 40, 50 peaches. But you really need to think about the weight that fruit is going to be. And Kathleen, I don't know if you talk about this, but the tree knows how many calories it's going to put on for the next year. It already knows that now, how many calories it's going to put on. So when you do this pruning and you're taking off a lot of the fruit, you're still going to, the fruit's just going to size up nicer. So you're going to get a bigger peach, a bigger apple, a bigger pear, instead of, whatever, instead of 500 tiny peaches, you'll get 200 nice big peaches. But then you just need to all be thinking, this peach could actually weigh a pound. And so you have to just keep that in mind.
And even like if I was pruning this apple, I would probably take off this spur and this spur.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe even this spur.
Yeah.
So that I wouldn't have to thin the fruit. It's much easier to do it when there's no leaves or fruit on it.
Yeah.
And it's better for the tree, I think.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to cut off a spur versus a stone fruit. because spurs do last so long. You know, you're cutting off that spur and that spur is then gone.
Yeah,
So it's a little bit harder.
yeah. But look, there's a little one coming in.
Yeah, true.
Yeah. And I mean, if you didn't cut it off, you'd have to thin that forever,
Right. True. Yeah,
for
that's a good
10
point.
years.
Yeah.
So calming pests and insects of palm fruit, codling moth, that's the worm that you get in your apple. If you thin your fruit early, before the codling moth lays her eggs, she lays her eggs where the two fruit touch, is where she lays her eggs. And that little egg becomes the worm that's in your apple. So if you thin your fruit, you won't get, well, you might still get a few, but you'll get way less. I know there's all kinds of traps and pheromones and stuff, and people bag their fruit and all that, where I have found if you thin it, you're better off. All the pheromones and all that stuff, unless you get everybody in your neighborhood to do it with you, it's not going to make a difference. And the other things that apples get, or the other, oh yeah, it's things, because there's a bunch of them, is woolly apple aphid, which you can see the woolly right there. And this is an apple. And this is the tree's response to these aphids. A lot of times you'll see them, excuse me, you'll see them down at the base of the tree. Like if you're going to go buy bare root trees, look at the base of the tree and see if it looks like this. If it does, you might want to buy a different tree. There's also some rootstocks you can buy that are more resistant. But honestly, I've seen trees with woolly apple aphid that are 50 years old and they're doing fine. I don't think it's that big a deal. I mean, aesthetically, it's not pleasing, although I think it's kind of cool. But, you know, it's kind of what is your tolerance for things? I know Lisa and I had a teacher that was rubbing alcohol every day on her apple tree to try to get rid of the woolly apple aphids. I mean, I'm simply not willing to do that.
Yeah, that's too much work.
Yeah, way too much work. So just be aware that there are woolly apple aphids. There is rootstock that's resistant, and they're probably not going to damage your tree if you let nature's natural enemies, you're better off. Fire blight. Oh my goodness.
That is this might be a big year for fire blight because we have so much rain this year.
Yeah, although they like the warm.
Yeah.
So I don't know, but I just took out a pear, actually an espalier pear I had, that half of it was fire blight. So fire blight is a bacterium. If anybody tells you that they can spray your tree for fire blight, don't believe them. I know some people in San Francisco were saying they were spraying copper, saying they were spraying for fire blight. Not true. It won't help. If as soon as you see the damage, you remove it, that's your best bet. There's not a great solution to fire blight. There are some resistant. Do you want me to leave this slide up for a little bit?
No.
Okay. If you do see it and you're going to cut off the branch, go down to the next branch juncture and make a cut. And if the branch looks clean, if it, you know, there's no brown in it, you're okay. But if there's still brown in it, go to the next branch collar and do that again. And I would put this in my green waste. I wouldn't compost it. Here are resistant varieties. Some are more resistant than others. Apples aren't that bad. I don't see it that much on apples.
I hardly ever see it on an apple.
Yeah, I see it on pears like crazy.
Pears and Asian pears too.
Yeah, Asian pears. Oh, and quince. I see it on a lot of quince.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah, even Filoli had it on their quince.
Okay. I have a lot of quince where I live, but I don't have fireblade on them.
Yeah, it might be different.
Yeah.
Anyway, I sent this presentation to Can, so I'm sure she'll send it to you if you want for resistant varieties. Okay. And supposedly, I don't know what rootstock my pear was. I should, but there's some rootstocks that are more resistant than others. Any of the OHXF series are all resistant.
Yeah.
So when you get your pear, make sure you get an OHXF.
And I just got a list of trees, bare root fruit trees that are for sale right now at, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly, Yamagami's in Cupertino.
Yeah.
And they tell you what rootstock their trees are on. And almost all the pears were either on OHXF 333 or they were on an OHXF. So they were all on resistant. And I can't remember now, and their peaches are on level and their nectarines are on citation. And anyway, it was interesting, but they give you both the scion and the rootstock, what you're buying.
Yeah, San Lorenzo does too.
Okay.
And they actually group them by variety and by rootstock. So there's two little subgroups.
Yeah.
So 333, I think, was the original. I'm not sure, but tolerates soil, bears fruit. They're, again, they're resistant. They're not 100%.
Yeah.
So I'm sure I had OH something.
Yeah.
So prune apricots and cherries in August or after harvest to avoid eutypa, dieback. And we did this presentation maybe last year, and somebody asked me, do the crosses also? And I have a pluot in my backyard, and I pruned it in the winter, and lo and behold, they get eutypa too.
Okay. So all the crosses
of cherry and apricot.
Yeah.
Which
And
there's a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. I've never heard of pluary before. That was the first I've ever heard of that.
Yeah, same here.
Yeah. But there's a lot of crosses with apricot. So anything that has any of those letters in it, that it's a cross.
Yeah.
And I will tell my little story. So last year, we had that huge storm in December, and then we did not have one drop of rain for like 2 months, maybe longer. January was dry, February was dry, and I think half of March was dry. So we had like 10 weeks of zero rain. I don't know if everybody remembers last winter, very different than this winter, but I don't know why I just had this sixth sense in me that we're not going to have rain. Kathleen has told me never ever to prune my apricot in winter, but I just have a feeling that the conventional wisdom, if you're not going to have rain for 6 weeks, you could go ahead and do your apricot. So I just had this feeling we weren't going to get rain for 6 weeks. So I went ahead and did a winter prune on my apricot, and we didn't have rain for 10 weeks. So you think I would have been okay with that, but I wasn't. I think almost every single cut I had eutypa. So just do what she says. That's the name of that story. Just don't do any pruning. Don't do any cuts at all on your apricots or the apricot blends. Just do it in August and you're fine. Or July. Do it after you've harvested your fruit.
And UC says cherries as well.
Yeah, which is interesting. I don't know, because there's just not that much. We don't work on cherries very much, so I don't see very many cherries. I haven't seen you type on a cherry, but I've seen it, you type on almost every single apricot I've ever worked on has Eutypa.
Yeah, same here. Even though they say if you make a cut in winter, if you cauterize it, like blowtorch, but we're actually gonna go look at one that we did that to and see what happened.
Yeah,
I don't know if it'll work or not.
be interesting.
Yeah. So apricots, the fruit's not as heavy, so you don't need to worry as much about your fruit, but still, if all your fruit's on the end, I would prune some of their little spur things out.
In some.
But their spurs are only good for 2 to 3 years. Prune back by 2/3 and thin new shoots. Lisa loves apricots and apricot trees. I personally, if you have a small backyard, it's probably not one I would grow.
You don't get reliable crops with apricots anymore. You used to, but now I planted an apricot. I didn't let it fruit. I don't let any of my fruit trees fruit for the first 2-3 years, but I let mine fruit this past year and I had a pretty good crop. But I might not get another crop for another 2 or 3 years. Sometimes you don't get a crop except for once every 5 years. So they're just not as reliable. Like a peach, I've never had any other tree but an apricot do that.
Yeah, well, they flower so early that the
Oh,
bees aren't
bees.
flying and they just don't get pollinated.
Yeah. Okay.
Or rain knocks off their flowers.
Yeah. So they're just more susceptible to other stuff.
Yeah. Cherries, you don't have to worry about the weight of your fruit at all with a cherry. Again, don't prune in the winter. Then, kind of crossing branches, remove dead and disease. That's about it.
Yeah.
Cherries want to go up too, don't they?
I don't know. I've seen some big cherry trees and they look like lollipop trees. They've got a big, huge, pretty canopy.
Yeah.
Not like a pear or a plum.
Yeah. Cherries are very susceptible to sunburn. They have really thin bark. So you're going to want to paint any bark that is exposed. 50-50 latex, water, at least until they're big enough where they have foliage that covers their bark. They also get a ton of insects and diseases. And my brother had a cherry and I was managing his orchard at the time, and he had aphids like crazy. So I thought, okay, I'm gonna spray neem oil. I'm gonna be organic and all that, but I'm gonna spray neem oil and I'm gonna kill all of his aphids. So I got my sprayer and I'm ready to go. And I saw these little buggers too. And I thought, oh my goodness, I'm going to get 2 for 1 here. I'm going to kill his aphids and I'm going to kill these other awful insects. And when I got home, I was like, I don't know why, but it was really bugging me. What was that insect that I killed? And turns out they were soldier beetles there to eat the aphids. So I killed all of his predators and I felt awful.
Yeah. And everybody should know that was a long time ago. That probably was like 15 years ago.
Yeah, that was a long time ago.
You would never, I
never spray anything now.
Yeah, you've evolved as a gardener.
Well, it's funny because I was telling my spouse the other day, about evolution.
Yeah.
I said, when I started gardening, I thought fertilizer was like garlic. The more, the better.
Yeah.
And I don't know when I bought fertilizer the last time.
Years and years and years. Yeah. Oh, well, it's not this class, but you can take over it. You once you start gardening, you go from chemistry to biology, and then you figure everything's biology. Chemistry doesn't matter.
Yeah,
Sorry for all the chemists out there.
sorry. So this is from Orrin Martin's book. And I just said I'd throw it out there. Just, there's a
Yeah.
lot of organic gardeners who spray a lot.
Yeah.
And there's all kinds of organic methods to kill. So that's,
Yeah. That
they're just
doesn't make it good, and it doesn't make it right. It just,
yeah. I mean, in the early days of organic gardening, nicotine was like their number one killer.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
in enough concentration, you can kill almost anything with something.
Yeah.
Okay, on to plums. Plums are great. If you like them.
Yeah. I like
I
eating.
should have a slide, plant what you like.
Yeah, but that is a good thing to say. If you don't like plums or whatever fruit, pears, then don't plant them.
Yeah.
But if you love peaches, then plant peaches.
Yeah. My spouse, we have several apple trees, and she just ate one of our apples the end of this summer and was kind of like, it's really not that good. And I was like, hallelujah, I'm gonna put in a peach. But I mean, obviously, I shouldn't say obviously, these are your fruit, which they're pretty easy to tell, I think.
Yeah.
Plums, you don't need to worry about weight so much of the fruit. Maybe a little bit, like if you had a little twiggy branch with some fruiting spurs on it, I probably would cut it off. But
Yeah.
yeah, plums are pretty bulletproof, except they like to go up.
Yeah, I'd say plums are bulletproof, but since it's a pruning class, they are the hardest tree to prune.
Yeah, they are.
Because they are unpredictable. Mostly when you make all the cuts that Kathleen's been talking about, the thinning cuts, and you're cutting to an outward facing bud, and on a peach tree, you almost know exactly how that tree is going to react. On any tree, you almost know exactly how that's going to react. On a plum tree, you have no idea. You make a cut, you could even cut to the branch roots color, and then all of a sudden you get a bunch of
you need like 3 branches.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, plums are absolute nuts, and they're hard. I think they're very, very hard to prune.
Yeah, they are. They're totally unpredictable. And if you prune them in winter, you better go back in spring.
Yeah.
Because you're going to have to undo everything the tree's done.
Yeah. And they're also very vigorous. So you're going to get, I was just out pruning my plums the other day. I have some branches I did a summer prune, but I have some branches that are 6 feet tall with this year's growth. And they're straight up. They're absolutely straight up. So I'm taking a bunch of those off, but, well, I'll put it this way. I think with both peaches and plums, it's hard to over prune.
Yeah. Peaches, I almost cut every branch.
Yeah. They're both so vigorous.
Probably plums too.
Yeah. There's a lot of vigor.
Yeah, very vigorous. All right, peaches and nectarine. You really, really need to worry about your crop load. Prune back new growth by 2/3. Keep your structure thin young trees and brace your branches as the crop ripens, because they make a lot of fruit.
Yeah.
Yeah, any advice on peaches, Lisa?
No, I think maybe we get through the next few slides and we open it up to
Okay.
questions.
Peach leaf curls, copper spray at Super Bowl. Unless it's raining like cats and dogs.
Yeah.
This is from the UC Davis. They say 3 times, Thanksgiving, Christmas, Super Bowl, you spray with copper. The copper they used to recommend is no longer available. So they haven't really changed their recommendations. I have a peach tree, it gets peach leaf curl. I just kind of live with it until the leaves fall. They fall pretty quick. You can even take them off and you get new leaves.
Yeah, that's the same thing I do. If you're going to spray with copper, you're going to have to spray both sides of every leaf. Copper is a fungicide, so then it drips down onto your soil, and then it's killing the fungus in your soil. I just don't, well, personally for me, I'd rather live with the ugly leaves, and I know it's going to completely refoliate, and not get out there and spray copper personally.
Yeah, and it might shorten the lifespan of your tree a year or two, I think. I mean, I don't know, but yeah, it's not worth it to me. And I have an electric sprayer, which is, makes it way easier to get great coverage.
Yeah.
Thinning the fruit. This is towards the end. It's really, really, really hard to do.
Yeah, it's hard until I'm finally to the point where I don't have a problem thinning fruit.
Yeah.
But it took years.
Yeah. But yeah, the general rule of thumb is pinky to thumb tip. I actually would have thinned this even more.
Yeah, I would have too.
I would have taken more off.
Yeah.
But this was Chuck Ingles.
Yeah, I would say, so when Kathleen's saying 5 to 6 inches apart, you shouldn't have any fruit. You should have a fruit every 5 to 6 inches. And this isn't thin to 5 to 6 inches on B. But what I do, I go through and I take 50% of the fruit off. And then I go through again and I take another 50% off. So I'm taking 75% of my fruit off.
Yeah, it's hard.
It's hard to do because you're dreaming of peach pies, but you got to do it.
Peach ice cream.
Yum.
Apple, 1 per spur, I think.
Yeah.
And so does Chuck Ingle, or did.
Yeah. And this is very common. You'll get 5 little apples, and you should be, it's early spring but when they're the size of your pinky fingernail, that's when you're thinning. Yeah. And then I do come through later and I thin again, because you can never, I think you have to go through twice to thin.
Yeah. And you just kind of snap them back and they just fall right off.
Yeah.
They're not hard to do. And I mean, you can see if you were a little moth, you would lay all kinds of eggs in there and there'd be worms in your apples, but this doesn't look like such a great place to lay an egg. Okay, most common pruning mistakes: bad cuts, covered that. Over pruning, we kind of don't try not to cut off more than 25% of the foliage. And using dull tools. Almost everybody uses dull tools. Almost every cook has knives that are not sharp enough. It's just life. When I'm pruning, probably about every hour, I stop and I sharpen my pruners, And, just like a knife, if you sharpen them all the time, it's not that hard to do. Can you see this, Lisa?
Yeah, but you're tiny. You might want to go to your next slide so they can see. Oh yeah, you could put it up there, or I think on your next slide, you have the actual tool that you're using.
Do. Okay.
Oh,
No, okay, good pruning, bad pruning. We kind of done that.
yeah. There's
This is the tool I use. It looks a little different. It looks like this. I'm pointing to my screen. Like you guys can see me. They look like this now. The rough grit is perfect for pruners. And you just a few swipes. If you do it all the time, you don't need to spend a ton of time doing it. And that's it. Your pruners are sharp. This is just a horrible, horrible mess of a tree.
that was a bad heading cut, and that's what the witch's broom looks like.
Yeah, exactly. Plus there's a vine up there.
Yeah, that's a confusing tree.
So when you don't know what to prune, and Lisa has a great saying for the two types of pruners.
Oh, it's from Terry.
Yeah.
Yeah, Terry Linkso said, yeah, there's two types of pruners. There's the cup of tea pruners, and the other kind of pruner is Kent, but I can't remember what she said that was called. But some people go look at their tree and they're deciding how they're going to prune, what they're going to prune, and then they decide, oh, I'm going to go have a cup of tea and think about it. So they never cut anything. And then the other pruner, oh, you should show Kent. I think he's coming up.
Yeah, he might be.
The other pruner that's our brother Kent. And he has a large orchard. He has almost a 5-acre orchard. But then he's the kind of pruner, he just goes and cuts everything. And so I think you actually kind of want to be in the middle. You want to, you want to be thoughtful about it, but you want to cut.
With Kent, we were pruning with Kent and Lisa and I, and it was a young tree, and we were discussing what should we prune, and and all of a sudden he's making cuts, and it was just like
oh holy cow, we're just talking about what to cut, and all of a sudden you hear the noise of the cutting, and you're like, what's going on? And that's Kent's dog Jacko,
who we were told to keep clean that day. And not let him get into the gophers.
Let him not dig. He's a white dog. You never know it. Well, should we open it up to Q&A with Cam?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we've actually got quite a lot of questions here. So let's go back. So let's see here. Kathleen, you had put up a diagram in the beginning of the talk that sort of showed the letters referring to which cuts to make and all that. Maybe if we can refer back to it. There's a question regarding which of the letters in the diagram refer to which cuts that folks should be making.
I know what slide you're talking about. That one, right? Number 3. Yeah. Terminology.
Yeah, I'm pretty certain that that's it there. And if we can pull it up sort of full screen, see if we can see that.
Okay.
Maybe just a brief overview of the cuts here. They're just wondering which where are the cuts? I mean, what this diagram is essentially just an overview of the diagram, essentially.
Yeah. Well, I would definitely take this off, because either this or this, because these two are crossing. These two are just repetitive. So I would probably take the outer one off. Just, the closer the branch is to the tree, the stronger it is. Broken, obviously. You could take it there or just take it off. That whole branch is a little funky.
Yeah, that one hanging down. I might do something different on that one, Kathleen. Well, you can't see. I'd probably cut off the one that's facing down to the branch ridge collar, and then the one that's facing up on the upper branch, I would cut just inside the broken. You could cut there or
So you
cut
could
there.
Cut there,
Yeah.
and take this off.
Yeah. That's what I would do.
Yeah, and you know, depending on what kind of tree it was, if it was an apple tree, I don't necessarily take, or pear tree, water sprouts off of apples and pears. I would definitely fix this stub. Because if you get fire blight out here, and it seems to always start at the tips. I don't know why, but it does. You know, someday you may need this to be a branch. Suckers definitely get rid of.
And you can see this is a central leader, and they did make a topping cut. They did make a heading cut up there, and you did get growth. You did get a bud to break, and you got a side lateral going up. So you didn't talk, Kathleen, I know it's a pruning class and not necessarily a bare root fruit tree class, but this time of year, all the bare root fruit trees are in the nursery. So if you're thinking about going and doing, buying a bare root fruit tree and planting it, one, you want to plant it high, but the one time you are going to do a heading cut would be once you plant that plant, you do a heading cut about 18 to 24 inches above the graft point. And that should be not on an apricot, but that should be then the only heading cut you ever make.
Yeah, I actually did say that.
Oh, you did? Oh, sorry, I missed it.
Okay.
All right, should we, next question? Is there another question, Can?
Oh, yes, I was talking. Apologies. I realized I was muted. This is pertaining to the Bay Area and all the rain that we've been getting. Is it better to prune when we've had sort of a few dry days, or will the rain sort of spread and cause diseases when we cut now?
I think that's a good question. I was wondering the same thing. I went out there between two rainstorms, and I'm wondering, am I doing some harm here by, you know, stuff splashing all over the place?
I have two reasons not to prune right now. Your ground is really wet, and you're going to compact it, and it's just miserable out.
Yeah.
I mean, you probably are. It's probably an increased likelihood of diseases being spread, but I hate getting like really cold and wet and miserable. So I don't like to prune when it's wet out, and even if it's not actively raining, the trees are still wet. And there's no way to prune without like water dripping down inside your coat, down your arms and stuff. It's just miserable. And I'm at a point in my life when I try not to do activities that make me miserable.
Yeah, and I just looked at the weather forecast. It looks like, I mean, we definitely have another like almost 10 days of rain, but starting next Thursday, Friday, not this coming weekend, but the following, we should have some nice, it's just a lot more pleasant to prune on a sunny day, but we have some nice days coming. So you might just want to hold off for about a week and a half and then get out there and try to get all your winter pruning done.
And you know, there's no rush. You can prune all the way till bud swell, and you can prune.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I really think of January as the winter prune month, but
That's just a mental thing.
Yeah, that's true. Well, and I will say, Kathleen, and you've kind of taught me, Kathleen, other than on an apricot, but you're pruning year round. I mean, you're just always pruning. When you're out in the garden, you're doing some pruning, you know, you're just always pruning. And I've kind of adopted that a little bit too.
Yeah, just keep your pruners in your back pocket. And there's like always a little something here or there that needs to be pruned.
Yeah.
I know this is, you know, predominantly a pruning class, but do you have any advice for winter grafting at all? And if so, just let's keep it brief because we've got a whole bunch of pruning questions here.
You know, I tried to graft once and they didn't take, so I think spring is actually the best time to graft, but that's all I know.
Yeah, we're not grafters.
Okay. Fair enough. Are there different times of the years to prune trees? Say, for example, apricot trees in summer, plum in fall, etc.
Apricot and cherry definitely in summer. I personally like to prune all of my fruit trees in summer because you don't get such a strong response. But I mean, there's not, other than apricot and cherry after harvest, I don't think there's like a hard and fast rule.
No, but I know, Kathleen, with this class, what you used to say is when you do a summer prune, you are devigorating the tree. You're taking away food sources. So a summer pruning is to control size. A winter pruning is to invigorate the tree and get a strong response. And I remember when you used to lead with that on these pruning classes is a winter prune is to invigorate, a summer prune is to devigorate. And then my question is, well, why do you prune at all if you keep devigorating and invigorating and devigorating and invigorating? And the answer to that is really because you're trying to get structure. You're trying to get the best structure for the tree.
And you want the best structure so you have the best sunlight.
Yeah. And then when you get the best sunlight, you get the best fruit. I mean, it all comes down to you want a nice tasting piece of fruit.
Yeah. And like if you see an old abandoned orchard of whatever type of tree it is, you will see a lot of broken limbs because of fruit load. And you know, fruit load on a long branch is gonna cause a tear out. And it's like Kevin Rafferty used to say, gravity wins. You know, eventually an unpruned tree, gravity wins.
Yeah. Oh
So,
gosh, that was so
yeah,
true.
I mean, you can certainly prune in the winter, especially a younger tree. I think older trees, it's nicer to prune in the summer and just a little bit and just to keep them small or
Yeah.
the size you want.
And I will say this, I just took back an orchard that I used to care for, but it hadn't been cared for in 4 years. Hadn't
Oh my
been
God.
hadn't been pruned. And these are fairly young trees. These are probably 7-year-old trees. But they hadn't been pruned in 4 years. I had so many tear outs and so many breakouts. My plum, I mean, Kevin, then I wasn't qualified. I didn't feel like I was qualified to prune after so many breakouts. And so I had Kevin come and prune. He did some heading cuts. I mean, I know what he's trying to do. I can see the method behind the madness. And he, on one plum in particular, he did probably 5 heading cuts, but he didn't have any choices. There were just so many breakouts. He was trying to get some buds to break on those branches. So we'll see. I'll know in a year how that turned out, but
Yeah.
anyway.
So is pruning a lifetime commitment? Is it something that you do every year, or can you stop after year 3, year 4, or whatever, depending on the species of the tree?
You do it forever.
Yeah, that being said, the first 3 years are your most important year when you're really forming those strong scaffolding branches, like that apple tree right there has some nice low scaffolding branches. After you get the basic structure, then the pruning is more like a maintenance. Like you just said, Kathleen, you're doing a light pruning, you're doing a light winter pruning right now because you've got the basic structure. So I'd say after year 3, it's a lot less intensive.
Yeah, but it's still something that needs to be done.
Yeah.
When I used to work for Leslie, I pruned her trees, you know, twice a year, every year.
Yeah. And is there an easy way to understand or visualize which branches are the fruiting branches?
They're
Every branch is a fruiting branch. It's just which part of the branch is fruiting. And if you just look closely, you can pretty much tell where the fruit's going to be. I mean, I can, once you do it a few times, I mean, I can look at my nectarine tree from probably 15 feet away, and I can tell where it's gonna fruit.
You'll get good at it. It takes time, but yeah, you'll look at that tree and you'll understand where the fruit's gonna come on. The only thing, Kathleen, I don't know, did you mention that persimmon fruits on,
I didn't do persimmon.
yeah, persimmon fruits on this year's growth and almost everything fruits on last year's growth. What
Oh.
other than persimmon fruits on this year's growth?
Figs.
Oh, figs, okay.
And
And
is it true that peach, nectarine, plums grow on year one growth?
They
They
grow on
fruit
everything.
on last year's growth.
Yeah.
Okay. And if a tree wants to grow to be a center or central leader like apples, wouldn't you want to keep it as a central leader and not make it an open center when you're doing the pruning cut
Yeah,
or
especially
the
a
heading
pear.
cut?
Yeah, that's my pear tree. I tried to make an open center and it just didn't want to be. So it's now a central leader, modified central leader. Yeah, there is a certain, don't try to fight nature. And if an apple or a pear want to be a central leader, just, do a modified central leader where you have, one spur of branches, the skip, and then another spur of branches.
That being said, you can look at each individual tree, even though that is more common for a pear to want to be straight up growth. I do have a pear in my garden and it reacted differently. I did that first cut. It has some beautiful scaffolding branches and it's an open center and it's not fighting me and I'm not fighting it. I mean, it is what it wants to be.
Yeah, no, it depends on the tree. I mean, I also have a pear that I exfoliate and it's fine being exfoliated.
Okay, and is the growth of a cluster of witches spurs on a prune tree a sign of incorrect pruning? The reason this person's asking is because they hired a professional pruner to prune trees that were too tall for them to tackle themselves, and then they're not sure how to evaluate their work.
Well, yeah, I mean, a prune is a plum and they made a heading cut, which they probably shouldn't have done. They should have either cut the branch out or cut it back to another branch, but it is a plum and plums tend to do that.
Yeah.
Okay, and here's the next question. What fruit trees are good for espalier?
Apples and pears are the best for espalier because you can make them flat and they'll still fruit. Anything in the stone fruit family, which is peach, plum, apricot, nectarine, cherry, to get them to fruit, they need to be V'd. They won't produce fruit if they're just flat because they don't have spurs like that. So if you want an espalier to be just flat, pears and apples are the best. If you're fine with an espalier that does kind of a V, any of the stone fruit, I've also seen citrus espalier. It was gorgeous. It looked fine. So you can pretty much espalier anything. You should actually just Google it because there's all different forms of espalier. Even Chuck Ingalls up at UC did a whole bunch of espaliers of all different types of fruit and all different forms. And if you have a small backyard, espaliers are great.
Okay, awesome. All right, what brand of pruners do you recommend?
Felco or ARS?
Yeah.
They're both about $60.
Yeah.
I personally, I like the ARS better because they just open up with a squeeze. Felco don't, you have to manually flip it down, so it takes two hands to open. But yeah, they're both very good. There's also a company in Japan that makes some beautiful pruners, but like the Corona and anything you get at Home Depot is probably not going to be a very good pruner, and it's not going to be worth sharpening that blade.
And I'll just add that with the Felco and the ARS, you can buy new blades. So it is a big investment up at first, but you know, well, for me, every few years I'm putting on a new blade. How often are you putting on a new blade, Kathleen?
Yeah, every 3-4 years.
Yeah. So, and I think the new blades are $16. So I don't know, it's worth it if it's in your budget. I think it's worth it to buy a nice pair of pruners, and then every few years, I mean, sharpen it all the time, but every few years, just get a new blade.
Yeah, and ARS has a long-handled pruner. Don't get the fixed length one. Don't get the adjustable length one. They don't cut as thickly. And those are wonderful to have for fruit tree pruning.
Yeah. And could you talk about sanitizing the blades and pruners between pruning?
You know, Dr. Robbie at UC Berkeley tried to pass fire blight onto another tree, and he could not do it successfully. If the disease is actively growing, sanitize. Otherwise, don't worry about it.
Yeah, and to sanitize, you can just have a jar with you of those like Clorox wipes, or you can have a spray bottle with you of, do you just use alcohol, Kathleen, rubbing alcohol?
Yeah.
Just like rubbing alcohol, and you can just squirt it on there. Yeah, but you don't need to go through great lengths.
Okay, perfect. Could you please address the need for and the practice for rescaffolding with peach and plum?
Trying to get scaffolding branches to produce on
you
the
know,
tree.
peaches do tend to, the bottom part of the peach quits producing any fruit because they fruit on new growth.
Or on last year's growth.
Orrin Martin said that he has tried everything he can to get his peaches to start to fruit down below. The only thing I would suggest is notch the branch somewhere down low, and see if you could get another branch to come out. But I'm not sure.
Okay.
Might be time for a new tree.
All right. I know you had mentioned, you know, varieties like Pluot and Aprium and all that. Is the pruning for apricot crosses such as those same technique as pruning an apricot tree, or do you use a technique to prune it for the parent tree?
I would prune it open center. Sorry, just like any stone fruit. Just do it in the summer.
Yeah, and I guess I should say these pruning principles are universal. It really doesn't matter if you're deadheading a rose, you're cutting broccoli off of a broccoli plant, you're any pruning, any cut on a plant, you're going to be pruning to something. You're going to be pruning to a branch or a leaf or a flower or a sprout. But you're never just going to do on anything an indiscriminate cut.
Okay,
I'm not sure.
Fair enough. Did we address cherries at all? How do you prune cherries? Is that something that's easy to do?
Yeah, cherries you do in summer because of Eutypa, and you don't need to worry about weight load. You just cut them back by a third. Any branches that are dead, dying, diseased, crossing, take them out.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I would add with cherries, which you already talked about, is they are, well, this is true of all fruit trees. You should be painting, painting their trunk and even the big scaffolding branches with a 50% white latex paint or light colored latex paint and water. And not now when it's raining, but you need to put, it's just like sunscreen. You need to put sunscreen on these guys so they don't get wounds, because when they get wounds, then borers go in those wounds. So you need to protect them from the sun, and especially in winter. I mean, not so much this winter so far, but in winters past, we've gotten hot days in January, and they're totally naked without any leaves. And anyway, you can get sun damage on their branches and trunks. So you want to make sure that they're painted. I was going to say one other thing.
Especially cherries. Cherries are very susceptible to sunburn.
Yeah, they have such thin wood. And the other thing with cherries, I do have a cherry. I do keep it small because the birds get all the cherries. So I like to keep it smaller than some of my other trees, so it's easier to net, because otherwise the birds are going to get all your cherries.
Alrighty, thank you. Okay, so here's a kind of a semi-controversial question, I guess. Can you talk about when to spray pesticides to protect pollinators?
They say if you're going to spray a pesticide, spray it in the evening when the pollinators aren't flying. But I honestly have not found a need to spray pesticides.
Yeah, I don't.
And I will add, don't buy ladybugs.
Oh yeah, that's good. I don't really know what pests. I mean, I'll get pests in my vegetable garden, but really on a fruit tree, I mean, you get the occasional aphids, but you don't really get pests on fruit trees. You might get fire blight, but that's not a pest. That's a bacterium. You might get
Peach leaf curl.
sorry, peach leaf curl. That's no, that's a fungus. That's a fungus. But you really don't get pests. So
No, cherries get aphids like crazy.
well, okay, maybe cherries, although my cherry really hasn't had aphids. My citrus might get scale, and then I might get ants. But that's not, this is a deciduous fruit tree. So I don't know. I don't have my pests in my, what I worry about in my garden, my orchard is more squirrels and rats than it is any kind of an insect. So.
And if you do have a cherry tree and you get aphids, just cut them out.
Cut them out or spray them off with water.
With water.
Yeah.
So you really, in our humble opinion, you do not need to be spraying with pesticides.
But if you do, do it in the evening.
Yeah. Fair enough.
Okay. Can you prune plums in the winter?
Yes.
Okay. Can you talk about pruning multi-grafted trees?
Yeah, that's that's where I was talking about. Oh, this is going the wrong way. About the branches and how they react to a heavy cut. That if you have, this is where most people, it's really counterintuitive and it's really difficult to do. But if you have a multi-grafted tree and one of the branches is growing really well and really vigorously, you want to cut it a little bit. If one of the branches is not growing well, you want to cut it back at least 50% so that it will respond with a good growth. And it's I know I know it sounds counterintuitive and it's really hard to do, but that's what you have to do with a multi-grafted tree.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. It is a little counterintuitive, but I get the vigorous growth, cutting it back as much. So does prune back new growth by 2/3 for peach tree mean thin out 2/3 of new shoots or head back shoots by 2/3?
It means prune back new growth by 2/3 to an outward facing bud.
Okay, sounds good. Does the same pruning principles apply to pruning citrus
No.
varieties?
Well, no, in the sense that you're not doing a winter and a It was citrus, I'll let you, but you can do a spring prune. You don't want to do a winter prune on citrus because you don't want it to put out new growth and get hit by frost. But the same principles as far as heading and thinning cuts are universal. But really, unless your citrus is like hanging on the ground, oh well, I don't prune my citrus. But Kathleen, I'll let you answer.
Yeah, citrus don't like to be pruned, and citrus burns super, super easily. I do skirt up my citrus, which means I don't have any branches touching the ground. If I have a crazy ass branch that's headed straight up, I'll cut it back to, a leaf growing the way I want it to. But I don't prune my citrus much.
Yeah, I don't either.
Okay. Do you have any tips for pruning blueberries? Are they similar to the rules of thumb for any of the trees you have covered? I think fruit usually forms a second year growth.
Yeah,
Growth.
blueberries, you want to cut out any dead, obviously, but you don't do, they're a bush. So you're not trying to do an open center or a central leader or any of that. You just kind of want to tip it back. Any crossing branches, blueberries are different than anything else. And you also want to encourage new canes. So mostly it's cutting out the dead.
Okay. This is pertaining to select varieties of apples like late one like Granny Smith. How can you prune for the size and not promote new growth since the fruit matures like late in fall?
I think thinning. Wouldn't you say, Kathleen, if you want to have a bigger size fruit, you thin?
Yeah.
I don't know if that answers the question.
So I guess it's okay to winter prune apples.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. What about if you get peach leaf curl on nectarine or peach fruit?
It's not on the fruit, it's on the leaf.
Interesting. Yeah, I figured it was on the leaf, but maybe this person can clarify what they mean by that. Okay. Any comments about Meyer lemon trees? Noticed a lot of dead branches inside the tree a few weeks ago. I cut them out, but worry if it's diseased. It's loaded with lemons and otherwise seem healthy.
I think
It could be some of the branches on the inside didn't get any sunlight. So the tree naturally conserves its own energy and it doesn't put that energy into a branch that's not getting sunlight. If the tree looks healthy and you have fruit, I wouldn't worry about it.
yeah, I probably wouldn't do any more pruning on it until spring because if you cut it back to a branch ridge collar, you're fine. It's not gonna put out new growth. But if you just cut it out, but not to a branch ridge collar and it wasn't all the way dead, it's going to try to put out new growth. And fruit, citrus fruit on the outside of the tree. So they need well, like Kathleen's been saying, they need a lot of sun, and the sun, so you don't do a central, I mean, you don't do an open center with a citrus. You do that with the stone fruit.
Okay. Alrighty. Is it okay to leave fruit on the ground to compost around your fruit trees?
Unless they're diseased, I don't see a problem with it. Kathleen, do you?
No, but I put mulch on top of it because it will get moldy or fungus, same thing. And that might affect the health of your tree. I let my fruit drop, but every year I put mulch around my trees.
Yeah.
And the mulch will cover it so the fungus won't splash up on the tree.
Yeah, and the only other thing I'd say, you're encouraging more squirrels and rats. If you just leave all that fruit there, and I don't know if other people have the same problem, but like I said, my biggest nemesis with my fruit trees is squirrels and rats.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I try not to leave fruits on the ground. I compost them away from the trees just for the possums, raccoons, and all of the little critters that come down and eat there.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on figs and or persimmon pruning and care?
Yeah.
Similar principle for pruning as well for those two trees?
Yeah, my fig is an open center, but figs are funky. Figs do whatever the heck they want. I'm trying to keep it kind of smallish, so I'm not pruning it that much in the winter. And persimmons prune in the winter. You could do anything you want with a persimmon because it fruits on new growth. Persimmons can get pretty wonky too.
Yeah.
So just, you're probably going to need to prune them in the winter and then kind of check them in the spring and the summer as well.
Yeah. Both of those trees, I think they grow pretty cattywampus.
Yeah.
They're
That's
just
why
like,
I love both those trees. I have both those trees, and it's like, you can do whatever the heck you want. You can exfoliate a fig if you want.
yeah, but kind of good luck though. I mean, they just want to grow like crazy,
Yeah, they do, which is kind of fun because you kind of can't make a mistake. As long as you make a good cut,
Yeah.
you're fine.
Yeah, they're in the ficus family, right? They're in the rubber family.
Yeah.
And they're really rubbery. Like
Yeah,
it can
they
be
are.
a big thick branch and like, oh God, I better get out the big saw for that one. I mean, you can almost do it with a fingernail file because they're just made out of like rubber. I know. They're like Gumby trees.
Yeah.
Alrighty, so going back to peach leaf curls, you had said that you'd rather leave the curly leaves than to use copper spray. So then with the peach leaf curl, does that not hurt the tree itself?
It does. It takes a certain amount of energy for that tree to refoliate, which means you're going to cut a year or two off the life of the tree. But to me, the trade-off between a year or two of the life of the tree and killing all the fungus in my soil, I'm just not willing to do that. But I have a client that insists that I spray her tree for peach leaf curl, and I do.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's kind of a personal choice.
Yeah. Okay, so this person has an old pear tree and they have quite a lot of fire blight, and they're wondering how to prune it to salvage it, or should they just remove the tree?
I could tell you what I would do.
Yeah, I could tell you about 2 weeks ago, I took out my pear tree that was totally infested with fire blight. They could try, but they're probably going to end up that their main, the main stem is infected. And in that case, they might as well replace the tree. And right now is a great time. I mean, for $40, you can go to the nursery and get a new tree, and will definitely make sure it's on a resistant stock.
Yeah.
And I probably wouldn't plant it in the same place.
Yeah. That's the exact same thing I would say. I would go ahead and cut that one down. You can leave the roots in place, just cut it down at soil level. And if you love pears, then buy another pear tree on resistant rootstock.
Yeah, or get a peach.
Yeah, or change out of the palm family. Oh, is it Oscar?
No, that's Theo.
Oh, okay. Hey, Theo.
I don't know if this is possible, but I'll throw the question out there. Can you show us how to sharpen tools, like both sides at a certain angle?
Oh, it's only one side, and Kathleen says I do it at the wrong angle, so I'm going to have Kathleen show you. You'll just have to hold it, Or Kathleen, you could probably take your slides down and then you'd be bigger in the screen and you could show how to do it correctly.
Okay, am I here?
Yeah, I don't know. Can you spotlight her, Can, where she's bigger? Or is that
Yes.
everybody?
Yeah, I can spotlight Kathleen.
Okay. Or I guess
Spotlight me.
There you are.
Oh, now we can see the Jesus bobblehead.
Oh, thank goodness. And look at all my other bobbleheads. Okay, so let me do it this way so you can see. Here's my pruner
Yeah.
and here's my sharpener. And you just go a few times, kind of keep the angle as you don't want to see. This is what Lisa was doing.
Oh, okay. And so the angle is more like a 20-degree or maybe
Yeah.
even a 10-degree angle.
Or even a 15. I think a 15-degree is perfect. And I
Okay.
will say, don't use your pruners on metal.
Oh, Kathleen. I can't believe you did that. So the first thing Kevin Raftery is going to teach you if you take his class is do not use any tool for a use that it is not intended to be used for. So that would be a wire cutter you were supposed to use there, not a pruner.
Exactly.
Okay, thank you for that. That's great.
Is that good enough? Did they understand?
I got it. I'm not sure if I think so. Yeah, that was great.
Okay.
All right, so let's move on. Let me go up to the questions here. Uh-oh. Okay, so this person, they have a small orchard of apple, apricot, pluot, plum, persimmon, nectarines, and citrus. Several have leaves that curl. Is there a resource or more that can help diagnose the different issues and offer instructions for resolution on the varieties so that they can take them one at a time?
Yeah, UCIPM.
Okay, I'm gonna put that in the chat real quick. UCIPM. There we go. Perfect. Have they, okay, so the questions for you both. This person's wondering if you've grown fruit trees according to Grow a Little Fruit Tree book methods of Anne Ralph.
Yes.
Perfect. All right, next question is on a bare root tree. Are you saying you don't do an 18-inch heading cut on an apricot? Is this because of Eutypha?
It is because of Eutypha. Kathleen, have you done that and then you've cauterized the cut?
Yes.
Okay.
And that's, I was saying earlier, I don't know how it worked. We did
Yeah.
that at Nicholas's.
So do you think you could not make that first cut on an apricot and wait until, let's say, June?
Yeah.
And then make that first cut? Yeah, that's
Yeah.
what you'd do. Okay.
I would.
Okay.
I might make it up a little bit higher.
Okay. A 24-inch cut.
Yeah, and leave a few branches.
Okay.
But yeah, I'd make a low cut.
Okay.
Okay. Next question is, can I use the same method as pruning an apple tree to prune smaller fruit bush, examples blueberries, and take away fruit that is too close?
You don't need to with a blueberry. It's not the same principle at all. It's a bush, it's not a tree. And you don't want to do an open center. You don't want to cut off that much foliage.
So it's fine to have clusters of fruits too close
Oh, yeah,
together. That's
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah, on
You
a
want that.
blueberry. Yeah.
okay. Fantastic. What are your suggestions for pruning pomegranates?
That's so funny. I was just thinking about pomegranates when you were talking about bushes. Because pomegranates, they're another kind of beast. I've got a pomegranate. It's beautifully pruned, not by me, by a Japanese artist, and it's just absolutely gorgeous. But pomegranates are kind of bushes also. They're not really trees unless you really want to almost do like a bonsai on them. Kathleen, what do you say about pomegranates?
I have a pomegranate in my front yard that, yeah, I guess I do an open center of sorts. But it doesn't get great sun, so it's not growing very fast.
Yeah.
So it's easy to do.
Yeah.
But start young. I wouldn't try to change a mature pomegranate to something other than what it is.
Yeah. And also they can get spikes on them. They can be, I think they're kind of hard to prune. I have one over in Woodside and I've just kind of let it be, to be honest with you. And it's just a big bush.
Yeah.
Yeah. Alrighty. So it's mentioned in several slides, something like keep spurs 6 to 10 years. Doesn't mean that once we have had fruits for about 10 years, we should replant a new tree.
No, what that means is that specific spur is dead or going to die, but there are probably spurs further up the branch and you just want to cut that dead spur off and you'll know when a spur is dead. It looks dead. I mean, it's black and it's totally dried up. It's like a dead little branch, a tiny little dead branch. You want to cut that off, but no, you still have a ton of spurs left on that tree.
Well, and they're developing new spurs all the time.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So this person has a well-established, excuse my pronunciation, Braeburn apple, 20 plus years old. It's a dwarf or semi-dwarf tree. It doesn't have good shape and it's not open in the middle. It's too tall and produces small fruit. They're wondering how much can they cut it back to fix this? And can this be fixed at all at this old tree?
Yeah, it can be fixed.
But it's probably going to be a 3-year process. I mean, to bring the tree down a third and then down a third and then down a third. And I think they'll be surprised. It's hard without seeing the tree, but the tree might react really happily to that of being smaller, and then it will put on new spurs. It will put on new growth. And it might be super happy.
And the little fruit issue is they need to thin their fruit more.
But that'll happen if they cut it down a third, a third, a third.
Yeah, they'll be able to get to it.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Going back to pomegranates, is there a time of the year that you would suggest pruning them if they're pruning at all?
Winter.
Winter, okay. Can you discuss grapes?
No, I don't know.
Pruning grapes.
There's 2 different kinds of grapes. I know that. And one want to do it.
There's spur grapes and cane grapes. And spur grapes, you just have one single cordon and you cut back each spur on that cordon. If you have cane grapes, you have several canes and you cut them back, but you have several canes. If you have a Sunset garden book, they actually have a really good section on grapes and grape pruning.
Okay. Sorry, so going back to the Braeburn apple tree, would you do that cutting the third method in the summertime?
Well, if you're trying to control size, I'd probably do it in the summer.
Yeah, you might as well. You might need to paint it because you're going to probably expose some bark to sun. That I would be careful and paint the bark that is, hasn't been exposed to the sun before and now is. But yeah, summer's a great time to do it.
Okay.
Yeah. And the reason why you're controlling size in the summer is you're taking off a lot of leaves, and the leaves are photosynthesizing and giving that tree all those leaves, the energy that it's producing is going to be stored in the roots over winter. So if you take off a whole bunch of those little solar panels, it's going to store less energy, and that's what's going to make it less vigorous. Really isn't the word, but that's what's going to slow its growth down.
Alrighty. In general, isn't the fruiting branches the ones that are lateral, and the ones that are vertical are not going to bear fruit? I know there are some exceptions, perhaps.
Yeah, especially with stone fruit.
Well, I would say I always have, it's the 45-degree angle where you're going to get most of your fruit. If it's totally horizontal, you're not going to get fruit. If it's
You do with apples and pears.
with apples and pears, but I thought it was a stone fruit question. No, but if it's straight up, you're not going to get fruit. And if it's a stone fruit and it's totally horizontal, you're not going to get fruit. You're going to get fruit on those 45-degree. If I'm the trunk and this is the branch, you're going to get most of your fruit on that 45-degree angle.
Okay. I know we covered a lot of pruning techniques. What is the best way to prune the tree to get the open base of the tree for more sunlight?
It's an open center.
Open center. Okay.
Well, when you first plant the tree, you cut it off at 18, 24 inches. And when you prune it, any branches that are going into the middle, you cut off at the branch ridge collar.
Okay. How do you handle aggressive rootstock sprouting? Not only suckers below the base graft, but suckers coming up from distant roots.
Yeah, I had a client who had a crab apple that did that. It's kind of the same idea of a heading cut and a thinning cut. If you can get to the root itself and cut it off at the root, it won't be as bad. If you cut it off at soil level, what you're doing is making a heading cut, and then you're just going to get like a witch's broom of suckers.
Yeah. So have you done that, Kathleen? Have you dug down to the root and you've made
I did at Leslie's because her crab apple was just insane with suckers.
Okay, interesting. It was a unique situation. You saw my peach tree, Kathleen, where I did the 18-inch cut, and then from the rootstock, I had this big scaffolding branch come in. I didn't even know that it wasn't the scion. I didn't realize it was below the graft, and I had this big, huge scaffolding branch, and then my tree bloomed out and everything was a deep, deep, deep pink, beautiful flower. And then one branch was a light pink flower. And I've tried now like 3 years I cut it off at the branch ridge collar. 3 different ones sprouted again, cut those off, they sprouted again. So sometimes the rootstock is very aggressive. But that's the first time I've ever seen that happen.
It's almost 3 o'clock, but I've got a whole bunch of repetitive questions here, but I'm going to ask 2 more questions and we'll just call it a day for the class. Is there a technique to prune avocado trees, or would the same pruning principles apply?
The same pruning principle as cut to the branch ridge collar, but avocados are evergreens, and I don't know enough to answer that question.
Okay, fair enough. Last question, what kind of mulch works best?
Good mulch.
Free mulch.
Free mulch, yeah. I just get my mulch from tree trimmers who trim trees, and they come and they give it to you for free.
Yeah, and I have a chipper and I make my own mulch. But any mulch is better than no mulch. That like quarter fir bark, whatever they have at your nursery. Especially sometimes they have it 3 for 4 or
Yeah.
whatever. And yeah, something. I'm sure Linkso's has some great mulch. We got
Yeah. Linkso's has really good mulch, and we didn't really get into tree care that much, but you know, you can spread a little bit of compost around under your tree. If you're putting mulch, you just want to make sure you leave a donut, like at least 6 inches around the trunk. You don't want mulch right up against your trunk. You want it away. But you do a lot of cover cropping in your orchard. I do too. So I put a little bit lighter mulch and I just throw out a lot of California wildflower seeds.
Great. Yeah. And check out Lisa and Kathleen's cover crop class also. So that's on the website. So, well, thank you to you both as always. Fabulous class. 2 hours went by super quick with lots of questions. And any last closing remarks that you'd like to share?
Can't wait till the weather's nice. Don't be miserable when you prune.
Yeah. And listen to a good podcast or something. If you're not with.
And if you have a gardening friend that you can do it with, it's way more fun, because then you can discuss what should be and shouldn't be, and Yeah,
I think that's a good idea.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Kathleen. Just amazing talk as always. And we'll see you next month.
Okay.
Okay.
Bye, everyone.